As you watch this video, a philosophical concept which I want you to keep in mind is the term existence precedes essence. This is a term made by French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. So what does it mean? First of all, pretty much all things seem to have a certain essence to it, which influenced its existence. Sartre gives the example of a paper cutter. A paper cutter's essence precedes its existence. The purpose of the paper cutter is to cut paper, and that idea precedes its creation. Therefore, for a paper cutter, essence precedes existence. Most things seem to follow this rule, but humans are different. When we are born, we do not have a fixed essence. Sure, we might be part of a culture, a family, or some other tradition, but Sartre states that in the end, our personal choices for our own freedom is what ultimately determines our essence. So for humans, existence precedes essence. So relating this to Berserk, one of the core questions this video seeks to answer is, what is Guts' essence? And as you can probably guess, this is something which continuously changes throughout the story. And it's one of the factors which makes Guts such an intriguing and amazing character. Secondly, a major theme, or the main theme of the Golden Age arc, is one regarding dreams and ambitions. This idea is most obviously pushed by the White Falcon, Griffith. At the start of the story, Griffith has a big dream to obtain his own kingdom, and further into the story, the Hawk leader endorses the narrative that dreams are the most valuable thing a man could have. It is extremely easy to just take Griffith's idea as a truism. After all throughout our lives, we are shown different stories and mediums, including through other manga and anime, that dreams are extremely important and valuable, and this results in us being indoctrinated to respect and admire people who are chasing their dreams. This further makes dreams commonly seen as something intrinsically good and meaningful. However, what makes Kentaro Miura's masterpiece, the Golden Age arc, so amazing is that it challenges the status quo. Because as the main character Guts learns along his journey, there is a largely ignored dark side to pursuing dreams. If you are going after some big dream, you are bound to have to stab people in the back and commit immoral actions, and you may even have to abandon the ones closest to you. To expect to achieve your dream without doing so is naive to say the least. When one goes after some grand ambition, other than the obvious things like hard work and dedication, probably the hardest thing to do is to make these morally questionable decisions. Moreover, there are actually very specific types of ambitions or motives which are represented and embodied by different characters throughout Guts' journey, and a big part of the Golden Age arc and Guts' early development is to do with the young swordsman's inquiry about which of these motives is the right one to live for. In this video, I will be calling this concept a precious thing, because this is how Griffith refers to this idea in the infamous speech scene. This video is long, because I did not want to leave out anything which contribute towards this main inquiry of the story. Through the many parts and chapters, by the end, this video will also seek to answer the following question. What precious thing is the right one to live by? So the best place to start off with Guts' life is to simply look at the time he was first brought into existence. Whether it is intentional or not, Guts' birth represents another important existentialist idea very well. Being born in such an ambiguous, dramatic way, Guts is thrown into the world. The concept thrownness, or in the original German term, Geworfenheit, is an idea brought up by German philosopher Martin Heidegger, describing the ambiguity and the peculiarities of our existence. We don't have a say or a choice into being born. It's as if we are simply thrown into the world. And for Guts to literally be found under his dead mother's corpse, which is hanged on a ritualized tree, he represents this sort of idea to the extreme. Shishu, a woman who very recently had a miscarriage, goes over to the baby and picks him up. Gambino thinks that the baby is already dead, and tells her to snap out of it. When the baby is dropped into the puddle, he cries out. Amidst all the lifeless corpses in the area, to Gambino and to the men's surprise, the baby is somehow alive. As the page narrates, under the dead body of his mother, the baby made its birthing cries, cradled in a mire of blood and afterbirth. Seeing that the baby is alive, Shishu rushes and picks him up again. When one of his men asks Gambino whether he is going to allow that, he simply replies, "Hell if I care. She can do what she wants." Interestingly, One of the other men says that the baby might be a bad omen. As mentioned earlier, it is strange to say the least that a small baby somehow remained alive amidst all the violence. But Gambino being Gambino simply ignores it, and dismisses the baby as a temporary toy for Shishu, who probably doesn't have much long to live anyway. However wrong he was. Guts briefly does have the bare minimum requirements for how an infant ought to be raised. He does get mended by a mother-like figure in Shishu, who seems to genuinely care about him, but when he is just 3 years old, she dies of the plague, her last words being a repetition of her calling for Guts. Losing his only mother figure, Guts turns towards the next closest parent-esque figure in his life, this being Gambino. The story has a 3-year time skip and it shows Guts assisting him on the battlefield. Gambino attempts to teach Guts to become a swordsman in a way to try and put him to good use. As he says himself, he can't expect to keep on eating 3 meals forever. We're mercenaries after all, mercenaries. We are shown an important scene where the two appear to be sparring. One of the other men asks Guts why he doesn't use a sword more suited for his size. Even though Guts is only 6 years old at this point, it appears that he is using an adult sword, one which is far too big for someone his age. This is a curious way of foretelling, because it represents that even when Guts was just starting out as a swordsman, he was already pushing himself by wielding a weapon far too big for his own good. Something which becomes a lot more relevant as the story continues. Moreover, the scene foretold Guts' natural ability in being a fighter, as expected from a much bigger and more experienced mercenary like Gambino. At first he gets toyed with, but he somehow finds an opening and manages to inflict a small cut on Gambino's face. This heats him up and leads the bigger man to knock Guts down. Considering the circumstances, Guts being able to land even just one blow on the mercenary leader showed the potential of the young swordsman. As Guts struggles through this injury he got from Gambino, he overhears the other men talking about how he was found and how he may be a bad omen, and how it may be his fault that Shishu died of the plague. In a way to deal with his emotions, Guts grabs his sword and hugs it. This is such an amazing page, because it represents the only thing Guts could turn to for emotional comfort. His sword. Being thrown into such a heinous environment, the only thing which gives him a sense of warmth is his sword. A cold hard weapon which is intended for harming people. This page also massively marks an important point in Guts' life. It established a time when the sword became the only thing he could rely on. From this point on, the sword becomes the fixed, fundamental part of Guts, and the question of his existence shapes into an inquiry about what he should be swinging his sword for and why. An important detail to establish here is that at this point in his life, Guts isn't swinging his sword because he wants to contribute towards some great achievement by the mercenary band. He is only doing it because he wants to be accepted by people. I mark this particular part of the story as the first time this idea was established. One idea of a precious thing is simple love and respect from the people you admire. The first person Guts looks towards in this way is Gambino. While Gambino definitely was abusive and cruel, there were a few moments where he seemed to have displayed genuine kindness and care towards Guts. He craved this type of attention because after Shishu's death, Gambino was the only person who gave him any sort of sympathy. So in these very early parts of his life, the only thing which Guts fights for is some approval or acceptance from this usually abusive, father-like figure. In this regard, the infamous rape scene not only displays Guts' trauma, but in an interesting way, it serves as a strong representation of how Guts wants to see Gambino. Although Donovan openly tells Guts that it was Gambino who sold him out, Guts does everything he can to convince himself otherwise. Even when he was on the brink of death, Donovan still tells Guts the truth, but Guts does not want to believe him, therefore he finishes him off, trying to ignore everything Donovan had told him up until that point. This almost delusional view of Gambino is held by Guts until the very end. When Gambino loses his leg, it signifies a sort of end to his character. Gambino, someone who always acted overconfident, and someone who always overlooked others, becomes a powerless disabled man who can't go to the battlefield anymore. Even then, he still continues to abuse Guts in a way to lash out his anger. Unsurprisingly, even after all of this, Guts still doesn't seem to resent him. Guts still wants to believe that Gambino has a good side to him. It is only when Gambino tries to kill him and admits that he was in fact the one who sold him out to Donovan, does Guts finally realize how much of a monster Gambino really is. Guts is told that he is a bad omen again, someone who was supposed to die, and that it's his fault that he lost his leg and Shishu died. When Gambino tries to swing at him again, Guts reflexively strikes back, ultimately killing him. The other men notice this and try to capture Guts, so he ends up running away from the mercenary group. Guts killing Gambino in this way signifies the end of a certain chapter in his life. For as long as he could remember, the only purpose behind him swinging the sword was to impress Gambino, but he ends up literally killing him, thereby losing his purpose. This revelation also marks a time when Guts started to lose his trust towards others, something which gets touched upon repeatedly throughout the story. The following stargazing scene represents this idea of accumulation beautifully. As mentioned earlier, after Gambino's death, he doesn't have a clear purpose to swing his sword anymore. He doesn't want to keep living. He tells himself there's nothing in front of him anymore, aka, there isn't any reason for him to keep swinging his sword. However, despite all of this, his body reflexively keeps moving forward and defends itself, even when it's against his will, and Guts strongly resents this side of him. Whereas just before, he had some reason to swing his sword, he is now left in a state where for seemingly no reason, his body reflexively swings the sword, against his own will. There is no meaning in Guts' life, but his body nonetheless pushes forward. In the chronological timeline, the Spring Flower of Distant Days arc takes place after this, but I have already made a 30-minute video on this arc, so I will not be covering it in detail here. But in short, the arc showed that while Guts still gets exploited by others, there was still a part of him that wanted to trust and rely on other people. After losing Gambino, Guts just independently wanders from battlefield to battlefield without any purpose. He simply takes orders and swings his sword so he can keep receiving money to sustain himself. He also averts from joining any groups or mercenaries, because he still cannot get himself to trust others. Even when he is offered more coins and a higher status, due to everything he went through as a child still affecting him, he simply cannot leave himself vulnerable. However, this all changes for Guts when he meets Griffith. There are so many things Griffith represents towards Guts, so let's just get the obvious things out of the way. From their first encounter, we see that Griffith, despite his appearances, carries considerable fighting ability. He simply outclasses Guts in their first two fights. This whole first encounter between him and Griffith also heavily affects Guts in an emotional way, because he sees someone in Griffith who, unlike himself, has everything lined up for him. While Guts was just an angry battlefield wanderer, in spite of the two being similar in age, Griffith is someone who has genuine respect from everybody else, while still having the strength and ability to back it up. And on top of all of this, despite how much of a straight up arsehole Guts is at this point in the story, for some odd reason, Griffith says that he's taken a liking to him, and that he wants him. And he uses their superior fighting ability to force Guts onto his side. The first conversation between Judo and Guts emphasizes his feeling. After succeeding in the first mission with the band, he reflects on the previous night's celebration banquet and how he was appreciated and welcomed by the others. Since he had been alone for so long, he wasn't used to all of the affection. So despite all the pushing away he did, it once again showed that Guts still wanted to be accepted by others. However, since he had held onto this pessimistic, distrustful view on others for so long, he doesn't want to admit this to himself. He still drags his feet in this way, but deep down, this is the only thing he craved. When Judo asks him what he thinks of the band, Guts tells him that it's hard to say. That the previous mercenaries he had been a part of were just made up of savages, but that the band of the Hawk somehow feels different. Something just feels off to Guts. as if things seem too good to be true. Judo replies with an answer which Guts probably had in mind. That it's all probably due to Griffith. On their own, the band will probably just be like any other mercenary band, but thanks to Griffith's charisma, they all trust him and figure that as long as they keep doing what he says, they'll end up achieving something great. Even after saying all of this, Judo admits to Guts that he doesn't really know what type of person Griffith is. He puts it in a very clear line. Is he a child or an adult? A good guy or a villain? I don't know what he is. He continues by saying that there is something different about him, that ordinary people like himself don't understand Griffith. This all overwhelms Guts because out of nowhere, he gets all of this warm and at times ambiguous attention. As mentioned earlier, he feels flooded by all the welcoming the rest of the band members give him, and secondly, he cannot make out why Griffith seems to put so much thought into him. During the first campaign, Griffith even went out of his way to personally rescue Guts out of danger. Looking back at Guts' life from this point, Griffith was most likely one of the first people who seemed to have genuinely cared about Guts. Other than Shishu and Chich, who very briefly showed Guts some kindness to him, everybody else in his life was some type of constant, who seeked to take advantage of him, but out of nowhere, Griffith pops into his life, and even though Guts is supposed to be just one of the many soldiers in the band, and even though he hasn't been in the band for that long, Griffith views him in this special and unique way. Guts isn't used to people showing him any sort of kindness in general, so it overwhelms him that someone just gives him this consideration for seemingly no reason. Additionally, Griffith establishes another perspective on what one's precious thing should be, this idea being the pursuit of dreams. Griffith is someone with a grand vision of what he wants in his own life, his goal being to eventually have his own kingdom, a crazy dream larger than himself, and one which occupies all of his intentions. He tells Guts in the morning scene after the first mission, "Guts, come along with me. This is no more than a single step. The ban of the hawk, all the victories on the battlefield, are just the outset, just the beginning. This is where it starts to get interesting. You can bet your life on that. I will get my own kingdom. You will fight for my cause, because you belong to me." Guts later smirks and laughs upon Griffith's declaration. He says that there is no way he can achieve something like that considering all the intangibles. But for some reason, he feels some weight to Griffith's words. He rationally believes that Griffith is crazy, but for some reason, he feels that maybe there may be something true to what he was saying. Reflecting upon all of this, he tells himself, "What I've been doing these past 4 years, running around from one battlefield to the next, just killing enemies, just surviving. Where am I going? Still don't have the answer to that question, Gambino." It is important to compare Griffith's ideology with the simple belief Guts had been carrying until this point in his life. As mentioned earlier, the only thing Guts had longed for was the respect and love from other people. This was the only purpose Guts had been conscious of, but through Griffith, he meets someone who for the first time has a purpose or dream which overshadows something as simple as gaining respect from other people. From this point on, the story becomes a battle between these two different types of purposes, or precious things, represented by Griffith and Guts. So the question now becomes, what's more important, getting love from the ones closest to you, or to live for some dream? And oh boy, is the answer to this complicated. Three years pass, and the band keeps racking up victories, increasing in size, and Guts is now a well-established commander. Against Casca's remarks, he expresses to her that he has changed from the guy he previously was, that he isn't who he used to be, and that he does think about his comrades. It seems that within these 3 years, Guts' desire to be respected by other people has been satisfied. we are immediately shown how highly the rest of the soldiers seem to regard Guts, and the admiration they have for him. Even though some time has passed, it looks as though Griffith still holds Guts in a special way. When the band encounters their toughest opponent at that point, being Nosferatu Zod, even though it seems like there is a slither of hope in defeating the monster, in a similar way to the first mission, Griffith once again selflessly puts himself in harm's way, just to get Guts to safety. The way the rest of the band, especially Casca, react to this only emphasizes how uncharacteristic Griffith becomes just for Guts' sake. This all makes Guts heavily reflect on his current situation. In the scene where Guts and Griffith have a short chat in front of the castle after all of this, Guts asks Griffith, "3 years ago you said, I can't lose such an excellent soldier, but to put your life on the line just for one soldier, that's a hot-headed thing for a calm, composed guy like you to do. So why?" Griffith replies, a discussion from 3 years ago. You sure can be picky. There's no reason at all. Do I need one? A reason? Tell me. Do I need a reason each time I put myself in harm's way, for your sake?" Guts later reflects on the statement as he gazes at the stars. He tells himself, that one time, it was the same sort of glaringly bright full moon. I don't know if this is the answer I was searching for or not, but for now I'll wield my sword for his sake. Guts declares that although he is still unsure whether he has found his purpose or not, for now, it seems that Griffith is the best person for him to put his sword to. After all that Griffith did for him, for the first time in his life, Guts begins to feel a genuine connection with someone else. He starts to see Griffith as someone who doesn't view him as a means to an end. Instead, he seems to be someone who cares for him just for the sake of it. However, this assurance completely diminishes on the night of Adonis' death. I made a whole separate video covering this event, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but in short, after receiving a secret order from Griffith to kill Julius, Guts goes through and assassinates him, but he also mistakenly kills Julius' son, Adonis. This emotionally affects Guts, because through Adonis, he saw someone like himself. Guts emotionally related to Adonis, because earlier on in the night, he noticed how the way Adonis was treated by Julius was reminiscent of how Guts was treated by Gambino. However, after killing both of them, it feels to him as though he just killed Gambino again, only this time, after killing Adonis, he sees it as if he has just killed a younger version of himself. So all in all, this event basically represented Guts killing his innocence. After all of this emotional distress, Guts searches for Griffith. He finds him, but he overhears Griffith's speech he gives to Princess Charlotte. This scene is extremely crucial because it is where Griffith's view on dreams as well as his answer to the precious things question gets fully fleshed out. At first, Griffith mentions Charlotte's question which he was asked back at the hunting grounds, about why men seem to enjoy little more than shedding blood. Griffith says that it could certainly be that men possesses their savage side, but that is a tool by which they secure and protect a precious thing. I suppose it is a double-edged sword. Charlotte then questions what this precious thing exactly is, and asks whether it is something like family or a sweetheart, which is exactly what Guts' precious thing was at this point in the story. Griffith states that there are some like that, but that for man, before he can obtain those two, perhaps he must come upon one other precious thing. This other precious thing being dreams. As he continues to say, for no other's sake, to accomplish it for him, for himself, a dream. He expands upon this point and states that there are different types of dreams. Some dream for world domination, some devote their whole life to the sword. Some dreams take a whole lifetime to find, and more importantly, there are also dreams which devour tens of thousands of other dreams. He continues by saying that regardless of status of background, at the end of the day, all throughout our lives, we are swept and controlled by different dreams. He eventually says that he cannot abide a lifestyle where he is one of these people, controlled by someone else's dreams. As he says, ultimately to be born, and to then simply live for no better reason. I can't abide such a lifestyle. So to Griffith, dreams are literally everything. His dream is more important to him than anything or anyone else. He even ascribes dreams to being like gods. He finishes by stating that even though he values his excellent troops, they are all using him as a reason to live. Therefore, the only person who he considers a friend is only someone who determines and pursues their own reason to live. Griffith's precious thing contrasts against Guts' ideology because, as mentioned earlier, up until this point in the story, Guts was just motivated by the simple desire to be respected by others. But after hearing this conversation, he finally grasped the extent to which Griffith valued his dream, and how much he was willing to put on the line to make it a reality. As Charlotte is mystified by all of this, they get interrupted by a message that Adonis and Julius had been killed. Although Charlotte is initially shocked by this, Griffith just wears an evil smile. Seeing all of this, Guts realizes that he was just being used. Even though everything that night had taken such an emotional toll upon Guts, it was just a simple chess move in Griffith's eyes. This all makes Guts begin to question what Griffith is doing, but far more importantly, it made Guts question what he himself had been doing. He begins to question whether the path Griffith is going towards is even a good one, and whether it was fine for him to just keep blindly fulfilling Griffith's orders in a morally questionable way. While they had fought side by side on the same physical level for 3 years now, he realizes that Griffith's mindset is in a completely different stratosphere to himself. Additionally, he takes it that Griffith just sees him as one of the people who he said he cannot abide living like. And finally, this whole event leads Guts to be influenced by Griffith's ideology that a personal dream is in fact the most important thing a man could have. This whole event looms around in Guts' mind during his next campaign. The battle starts out in the usual way for the Hawk, but for some reason, Casca doesn't seem to be her usual self. She gets cornered by one of the opposing commanders, Adonis, as he spews out a bunch of sexist remarks at her about how women do not belong on the battlefield. However, Guts comes to the rescue and puts Adonis in his place. He also notes how Casca is acting strange. But all of a sudden, she unexpectedly slips down the hill. Fortunately, Guts manages to grab her, but he ultimately falls down into the river below. He carries her into a nearby cave and attends her. When Casca wakes up, she lashes out about how she despises the fact that she is a woman. She also says that she despises that she was saved by Guts out of all people. Since the two are alone, he eventually asks her why she joined the band, and that it is unusual for a woman like her to voluntarily fight for a living. She says that it's for Griffith. Casca explains that she was born in a rundown village where it was normal to go for days without any food, as the village was constantly walked over and robbed. One day, a nobleman passed the village, and she was sold off to him by her father. However, the nobleman only bought her so that he could rape her. She says it was obvious when you think about it. She says there is no way someone would go out of their way to save some random girl. As she is forced upon, she says that she can't help it, and that it's natural. Being raised in such a cruel environment, she had engraved into her heart that she cannot do anything to change her circumstances. However, this all changes for her when Griffith appears. Amidst all the suffering in her life, Griffith looks like an angel from the gods. As she says herself, he was awe-inspiring and otherworldly spectacle. But this angel-like entity doesn't just simply save her. He drops the sword and tells her to defend herself if she has something to protect. She ends up killing the nobleman, and although she is afraid at first, for some reason, her fear goes away when Griffith puts his hand on hers. This was the real helping hand that Griffith extended. Yes, She was the one who physically saved herself, not Griffith, but he still heals her emotionally through his unexplainable aura. And going further, it is this mystical part of Griffith which leads her to join him. It's not just that Griffith is good with words, or that he is charismatic. There is something about him which just draws people in. Casca's whole life changed through this single encounter, and to her, ever since then, it feels like she's been in one long dream. She says that Griffith is like a miracle, even though he is supposed to be just a commoner like the rest of the band. And through this dialogue by Casca, we are shown two extremely important events which re-emphasizes and re-strengthens just how important Griffith's dream is to him. She first mentions an instance where Griffith noticed the corpse of a boy soldier, who was just around 10 years old. He looks through the boy's belongings, particularly at his toy knight. Griffith says that the boy must have greatly admired knights. He recalls how the boy would look at him as if he were the hero of some story. And he says, "I wonder if he was happy, dreaming. Did he die enchanted by his dream? Or was death the end of the dream? Was it despair? Maybe my dream is what killed this boy." In this scene, the fact that the victim is a young child is extremely important. There is nothing which shows off the weight and the heinousness of a situation more than the death of a young, innocent child. Casca says that she had never seen Griffith so somber before, and ever since then, she has started to look at Griffith differently. And this ties into the next scene, where Casca catches sight of Griffith being invited into King Genon's room. The next morning, Casca comes across him bathing in the river. He confirms that he did in fact sleep with the man last night. However, he explains that he did it for money. To this, she asks why. Because the band can raise the money just by winning. Griffith says that he doesn't want to risk losing more troops, and he suspiciously denies that this is due to the boy from earlier. However, as was alluded to, the boy's death clearly did in fact affect Griffith, because it put in perspective the type of losses he was bound to make were he to carry on following his dream. And Griffith blatantly contradicts himself here. He says he doesn't feel at all responsible for the death of his comrades, as they willingly chose to join him, yet he still goes out of his way to exchange his body so that he can prevent the risk of losing more men. He scratches deep gashes into his arms, and he tries to deny this humanistic, soft side of him. He has already put so much of himself into the pursuit of his dream, and he feels he cannot revert anymore. However, to justify all of his actions, he tells Casca, and more importantly to himself, that the only thing he can do in honor of his fallen men is to win. As was mentioned in his speech, he says that his dream can only be realized by building upon corpses, and the worst thing of all would be for all those fallen lives to simply go wasted towards a failed dream. So again, both of these scenes showcase why Griffith's dream is so important to him. He is fully aware that the pursuit of his crazy dream has led to people's death, his own innocence being lost, and that it will further lead to the death of countless people. He has already gone so far and has already made so many sacrifices, so much so that the only thing he can do is to keep going and to keep winning. Nothing can stop him anymore. Casca knows all of this and says that it is exactly why she continues to fight for him. She is the one person who understands this vulnerable side to Griffith. As she says herself, Griffith has to make himself strong. He masks all of the questionable things he does by justifying that it will lead to something great in the end. So the plight of Griffith's dream is that it gets more serious and more important to him as time goes on. And the more men he loses, the more the reason for him achieving his dream enlarges. However, despite all of this, despite how much has gone into his dream, and how much he himself focuses on it, there is one person who makes Griffith lose fixation on his dream. And this person is Guts. This whole flashback adds more meaning and weight to the first Zod encounter, as well as the other times Griffith risked his life for Guts' sake. Even though Guts is certainly a valuable and useful soldier, nothing about him justifies Griffith risking his life and thereby risking his whole dream for him. However, this is exactly what Griffith did. There just isn't a good rational reason to explain why Griffith gets so selfless and impulsive when it comes to Guts. There is just some unexplainable connection between the two. This was lightly touched upon during the first encounters, but even here, years later, it still hasn't gone away. And this is why Casca held so much of a grudge towards Guts. She says, "I don't care if you get yourself killed on some battlefield, but the Band of the Hawk, I won't let you take Griffith's dream down with you." She continues, "You're the one who changed Griffith that way, and I can't forgive you." Following this, the two notice the opposing soldiers searching the area, and we eventually get the famous 100 Men Slayer scene. This scene is certainly one of the most badass highlights in the whole entire story, but I am not going to talk about it too much here. While the battle itself obviously did show off Guts' considerable strength, it's what this battle meant to him and the way he reflected on it which greatly impacted his inner character. We had a closer look of this side of Guts in one of the most important chapters, the Bonfire of Dreams. Reflecting and talking about the battle to Casca, Guts tells her that it was all something he did on his own, that fighting is just a part of his nature. Guts doesn't see this as particularly impressive. The 100 men battle is extremely important for Guts, not because it meant something towards him, but because it didn't mean anything towards him. Even thinking about the story up until the latest chapter, this battle is still certainly one of the most impressive things done by Guts, and the others certainly emphasize this. But for Guts, it really doesn't mean anything, because he knows he didn't do it for any grand reason. There is perhaps nothing else which can represent Guts' state of mind so well. He tells Casca that it's nothing compared to what she and Griffith are doing. Griffith has something he'd bet his entire life on. He analogizes these dreams or goals with the collection of campfires he and Casca are overlooking. Each small light represents the dreams or goals held by the members of the band. However, the whole landscape is covered by the blazing inferno named Griffith, the grand dream which oversizes all of the little dreams put together, just like how Griffith alluded to in his speech. Guts sees it that everyone else in the band has some sort of a dream or a goal they can fight towards. But since he was someone who was unwillingly forced into joining the band, he seems to be the only person who doesn't have this external reason to keep fighting. We then see a panel of Guts being surrounded by his men. He says that maybe he's just warming himself, that maybe he just stopped by the campfire for a bit, just by chance. Here is a clear example of how Griffith's ideology has started to influence Guts. Although he does genuinely enjoy the warmth his comrades give him, Griffith's belief that dreams are more important than such things has started to alter his beliefs. He starts to wonder whether dreams are really more important and valuable than people. He fully admits that he might just be a sword-swinging simpleton, just like how Casca described, and that he had always left the actual reason for swinging a sword up to someone else. So bringing up the precious thing idea, Guts starts to reflect on whether he should have or whether he needs a dream to live for. This all finalizes in Guts' decision to leave the band after the last campaign, to search for his own purpose to live. After everything that happened, such as Griffith's speech and the close conversation with Casca, Guts starts to see himself as a meaningless figure without anything real to fight for. In the next chunk of the Golden Age arc, we are once again shown the plight of Griffith's dream, but a massive divergence takes place. The band win the Battle of Dolduri, their most important campaign so far, and it seems like Griffith and the band has finally made it. The whole band gets paraded, and they soak in the victory. It all seemed unimaginable 3 years ago, but thanks to Griffith's leadership, they had finally done it. As Guts reflects upon Griffith's declaration when he first joined the band, he thinks to himself, nobody but him. Absolutely incredible. This section of the story specifically emphasizes just how soulless Griffith tries to be regarding his dream. The first instance of this was when Griffith briefly crossed paths with Genon. When Jinon begs Griffith to spare him, Griffith says that he doesn't feel anything towards him, that he has no emotional interest in him at all, and that he just took advantage of him when the opportunity appeared. As he lastly says, "You are like a stone, lying by the side of the path I walk. That, and nothing more." And Griffith finishes him off. The second instance of Griffith's soullessness, yes that's a word, being shown, was during the aftermath of his assassination attempt. Griffith knew all along about the Queen's plan to get him assassinated, so he devised a secret plan along with Guts to get her entire group wiped out. Foss, the man who leaked this plan, also comments upon this part of Griffith. He says that even after all the cruel things he just did, he shows no sign of disturbance. Even after ruthlessly killing the nobles, he can still smile so innocently. Soon afterwards, at a watermill far from the scene of the Queen's death, Foss is reunited with his daughter, Eliza, who was kidnapped by the 5 original Mem with whom Foss conspired to kill Griffith at Griffith's behest. Griffith tosses them a sack of gold as their reward for siding with him, and they leave. However, unbeknownst to them, they are ambushed by Guts and are quickly taken care of. So every single person who knew about the occurrences, apart from Foss, Griffith and Guts, are all killed, so that nothing can be traced back to the Hawk Leader. And it's not just Foss who remarks on Griffith's soullessness. Griffith himself starts to be conscious of this. He asks Guts, "Does it seem cruel? I involved you into this filthy scheme, and I didn't even get my hands dirty. Do you think I'm cruel?" Guts just dismisses it. He says that he knows it's all part of his dream, and that it doesn't seem like he's being his usual self, asking such a question. So again, these two events clearly try to emphasize the part of Griffith that Guts already knows about, that Griffith will do anything, no matter how cruel, if it makes him closer to his dream. He puts away his emotions, knowing that he has to do heinous acts to get closer to the throne. Another thing to note is that Guts is the only person who knows about this side of Griffith. Yes, Casca and Charlotte did hear the speech about his view on dreams, but Guts is the only person, other than Griffith, who knows about the 2 secret assassination missions and how little concern Griffith seemed to show from it. The story is intentionally ordered in this way, in preparation for the next major event, which puts Griffith's beliefs and his ideology to the toughest test. As he had planned from the last campaign, Guts sets off to leave. The main band members get together for what seems like a final farewell, but Griffith challenges Guts to a duel. Everything, and I mean everything, was building up for this fight. This fight represents the 2 ideologies regarding dreams and precious things finally clashing together. However, an extremely important detail is that the script is flipped. After everything that Griffith had done since Adonis' assassination, Guts had been influenced by his words, and he had decided to leave behind the people he had built a bond with, so that he can search for a purpose. So now, Guts carries Griffith's ideology. But more importantly, the really brilliant part of this fight is that Griffith, the very person who influenced Guts in this way, is fighting for something which contradicts everything which he had previously vouched for. He is fighting for the sake of someone else. Everything Griffith had done had re-emphasized his point that dreams are everything, but all of a sudden, he contradicts himself and acts irrationally and impulsively for someone else. You simply cannot rationally justify Griffith acting this way, especially with someone who is usually so composed and calculated like Griffith. He tries to hide his intention behind the deal he had originally made with Guts, but the real reason he wants him to stay is just for the sake of it. Again, Griffith is fighting for someone else, while Guts is fighting so that he can find a purpose or a dream. Both are fighting for the very opposite thing that they had been previously fighting for the whole story. This dichotomy is proved within the dialogue of the fight as well. As Griffith plans how to attack, he tells himself that it's better off for Guts to die than for him to lose. If you're watching this video, I'm more than sure you know how this fight ends. So, Griffith loses. Now, Griffith's sword breaking isn't a metaphor of his dream shattering. Instead, It's a metaphor of Griffith's beliefs shattering. The narration on the final page of the fight is perfect. Guts says, "It's alright. It's like stumbling on a rock on the roadside. It's a pity, a small thing. The place you want to go is more distant, farther off. So, it's all right. You'll stand up and you'll start walking soon." He pretty much does the same thing Griffith had done to Jinon in their last encounter. Guts says that the situation is like a rock on the road. It doesn't, or it shouldn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. For so long, Griffith had been working towards his dream, putting his own life at risk, losing countless men, and killing countless others. And at the same time, he is supposed to be the soulless animal who will slaughter whoever gets in his way. But he completely contradicts his beliefs and lets the loss of one soldier completely and utterly destroy him. While Guts is obviously the most powerful soldier in the band, his departure isn't an automatic sign of the band ending. This is all a testament not to how stupid Griffith is. It's a testament to how passionate Griffith is towards Guts. While he is mentally and emotionally strained from all of this, Griffith goes to sleep with Princess Charlotte. He tries to temporarily take his mind away from the occurrence, but even during intercourse, the only thing which he can think of is Guts. This impulsive decision by Griffith is what leads him to get caught by the king, which further leads him to get imprisoned. As Griffith gets whipped, interestingly enough, the king also talks about something relevant to the precious things dichotomy. As he shouts out about how important Charlotte is to him, he says that there is no value in the world. War will forever continue, and tens of thousands of people will continue to die, and that peace is just a small gap in between never-ending conflicts. So to this cruel world, the will of the king is powerless. The king of Midland pretty much already lives Griffith's dream, but he is saying that it is a futile position. However, he says that more so than him being king or him being a man of great power, the one thing which gives him meaning is warmth. The warmth from his daughter, Princess Charlotte, is far more valuable than anything he can obtain purely as a king. But he continues to say that Griffith ruined this most valuable thing to him. However, Griffith talks back to the king and says that it's pathetic for him to have refused so many marriages from other nations, that the reason why he and the country of Midland isn't what they used to be is because he refuses to give up Charlotte. He ends off by saying that he's done nothing then not fail, and that he is worthless. This remark angers the king even more, and he orders for Griffith to be kept in the cell for another year. He says that this is the end of his dreams, his ambition, everything. The hawk has fallen to earth. I am sure most of you can already see the irony and the parallels here. It's as if Griffith is talking and reflecting upon himself. The very thing which put Griffith into this turmoil, which thereby destroyed his dream, was due to the way he couldn't handle the loss of someone. Just like how the king couldn't bear the harm of Princess Charlotte, Griffith couldn't handle losing Guts. This is further proved by the way that he says, "Worthless, this is worthless," as he sits alone in the dark cell. The year passes with Griffith going through a torturous hell. We see perhaps the most important pages in terms of understanding what Guts means towards Griffith. Being alone in the dark, cold cell, Griffith reflects upon himself, and we get some inner dialogue about how he first obtained his dream as a child. Within the poor neighborhood he grew up in, the one thing which seemed bright was the castle overlooking the whole country. As he says, "I made up my mind. The junk I would get for myself would be that thing." However, the shiny castle is far gone from the darkness he is now in. As the page narrates, darkness, deep darkness without even a trace of life. How much time has passed since I was cast into the darkness? An eternity. But it also seems like an instant. All my senses are numbed, and I can't feel a thing. What of my body? It's like it's floating in midair. Have I retained my sanity? Did I go insane long ago? In all the emptiness, only one thing is vivid. Amidst the darkness, the one thing which shined bright wasn't Griffith's dream. It was Guts. As the page continues to state, only him, like lighting on a dark night. He rises up within me, blazing, and again, like a tidal wave, an infinite number of feelings surge upon me. Malice, friendship, jealousy, futility, regret, tenderness, sorrow, pain, hunger. So many recurring, yearning feelings. That giant swirl of violent emotions in which none are definite but all are implied. That alone is the bond which keeps my consciousness from vanishing amidst the numbness. Through these pages, we learn that when Griffith thought of Guts, his dream seemed meaningless. Along his journey, Griffith had crossed paths with innumerable people, but he always knew there was something different about himself, and that there was something about him which grasped people's hearts. However, Griffith himself cannot understand why he gets so impulsive when it comes to Guts. Why it's him out of all people. He thought he owned Guts, but it turned out that Guts had owned him. Guts is the reason why he's been thrown into the darkness, but at the same time, he's also the only source of light. The thought of Guts shined more vividly than his own dream. On Guts' side, while all of this is happening to Griffith, he continues to go on a lone journey, challenging himself by versing capable opponents, but he eventually hears about the downfall of the band from an old man and decides to return. When he first hears about what happened to Griffith, he says he cannot believe it. Guts knows what type of a person Griffith is, and the beliefs he commended. So out of everyone, he cannot believe that Griffith can let his loss completely ruin him. Although the rest of the band tried to reject the notion that Guts was the one who caused all of this. In one particular scene, when the two are alone, Casca finally admits that Griffith is no good without Guts. Ever since the two met, although Griffith had been a powerful and capable figure, he just isn't the same person without Guts being under him. This conversation leads to an interesting revelation about Casca. In a certain way, similar to Griffith, her beliefs and values had changed due to Guts' presence. She reveals she was actually lying when she said she was trying to be Griffith's sword. She did everything she did because she simply loved him. Everything she said was all a way to mask her true feelings towards Griffith. However, Casca ultimately realized her powerlessness and insignificance when Guts left the band. She tries to kill herself by jumping off the cliff, but Guts saves her. As she looks up towards Guts, she says, "And there was one more thing I realized that day." Although Guts had caused such a commotion, at the same time, Casca realized her insignificance towards Griffith. She realized she had feelings towards Guts as well. Casca revealed all her true feelings towards Guts, and this heartfelt revelation leads the two to start having sex. But during intercourse, Guts' childhood trauma kicks in. He remembers about himself being raped as a child, and the way he killed Gambino. I see this scene as the time Guts' emotions had finally cracked. For so long, he had bottled these emotions up, keeping them to himself, but they finally hit a breaking point. As we knew all along, this tough-as-nails swordsman had his own inner demons. Even though he had gone through so many different things and had met so many people since killing Gambino, he never had anyone he could emotionally open up towards, including Griffith. If anything, Griffith most likely made him suppress these emotions even further. But here, Guts finally acknowledges his own emotional weaknesses. This all breaks him down and he spills everything to Casca. However, he soon snaps out of it and starts feeling ashamed. He wonders why it is that even after killing so many people, Gambino's death still haunts him. Despite all this, Casca still embraces him. The two had revealed their deepest weaknesses, and they both feel a new connection towards each other. As she says, "Somehow, I feel like we're finally even." They both shared their deepest, most personal scars to one another. This reconciliation reminds Guts of the time Gambino gave him some medicine, which was one of the first times he felt loved by someone else. Guts eventually talks about what he had learned in the past year. I made a separate video talking about this, but in short, although Guts initially left the band to search for a purpose, he learns through Goro that he does not need some clear-cut dream in order to live a meaningful life. Instead, he learns from the old blacksmith that there is absolutely nothing wrong with just continuously putting yourself to the test with whatever comes natural with you and seeing where it goes. This leads him to declare that after rescuing Griffith, he will continue his journey. Casca does initially throw a fit, shouting about how he is just like Griffith, just talking about dreams and being selfish, but Guts says that the next time around, she should come with him. He doesn't want to take her for granted, so he says that he needs her. After this reconciliation between Guts and Casca, the band initiate their long-held plan to go and rescue Griffith. They even get the much-needed assistance of Princess Charlotte, when the group eventually get to the bottom of the Tower of Rebirth and finally reunite with Griffith. Guts is the first one to rush over to him. The most important conflict in this section of the story is not in the physical battle Guts and the crew has against the guards, to the Bakirakas, or to Wild and such. The biggest battle starts right from the first time Guts and Griffith meet each other again. Griffith's eyes widens as soon as he notices Guts, and what does he do to the person who led him into all of the suffering, but at the same time, enabled him to keep his sanity? He reaches his weak hand out in an attempt to choke Guts. Judo immediately notices this as well. However, Guts ignores this and embraces his former leader. He hugs him with tears streaming down his face. Griffith, who is surprised by Guts acting this way, places his hand on top of Guts's. And then we see this very emotional panel of Griffith looking back at Guts as the tears fall on his helmet. While he did initially feel some anger towards Guts, Griffith seems to immediately show some remorse as soon as Guts shows some emotion and care as well. This is also the portion of the story where Guts seems to show the most affection and emotion towards Griffith. As mentioned countless times now, Griffith clearly had some strong affection towards Guts, but Guts never seemed to show it back to him as outwardly as he does here. This is most likely because he understood even further how much Griffith cared towards him, and because he felt some responsibility for the downfall of the band. All this heartfelt emotion soon turns into rage. The torturer appears and brags about all the fun he had with Griffith, and he lists all the physical suffering he inflicted this past year. However, Guts makes quick work of him and all of the preceding guards who tried to block the group's path, in a way to lash out all this anger. Something worth mentioning here is just how observant Griffith is throughout all of these occurrences. Although he is missing a tongue, making him unable to say any words, we can still get a sense of what he is trying to express. As the crew continue the escape, the group gets some help from some friendly villagers. The group say that they may never go back to the country of Midland ever again, and we get this beautiful page where Griffith looks back at the kingdom. Probably due to his weakening strength, the flowers he received earlier slowly break apart to the view, just like his dream. Even considering all the hell he endured in that very kingdom, it still has some sort of a beautiful quality to it from Griffith's point of view. Now we get the infamous Wild fight, which was removed from the anime and the movie adaptations. I have made a whole series talking about the fight itself and what it symbolizes, but for now, I will be focusing on what I didn't talk about in those videos, about what this fight actually meant towards Griffith. There are two particular scenes during the fight which shows off Griffith's state of mind. When the band ambushes and directly engages with Wild's army, Griffith gets carried out the front line on a stretcher. As he lies down, he faintly looks over at his men as they continue the assault towards Wild and his army. As he views the commotion, we see a sense of sadness and sorrow in Griffith's eyes. These are the same men he used to bravely command, but now he is left on the sideline, only being able to watch. Soon afterwards, in another scene, we see Griffith taking refuge in a small cave, and we get this very sad moment where he reaches out to grab a sword, but before he is able to even grip it, it gets knocked over. These scenes contrast against Guts, because while Guts continues to go toe-to-toe with Wild, Griffith is so weak to the point he cannot even grip a sword, let alone fight. Both of these scenes shows off how Griffith has now lost the two fundamental things which made him who he was. He can no longer command his men, and he can no longer even fight, both being abilities he pridely used to have. When Casca eventually gets captured and held hostage by Wild, Griffith seemingly tries to walk towards the monster, with an angered expression, as if he wants to do something. Guts eventually regains consciousness and saves Casca, putting up a fight again, but the monster catches on and continues to hurt Guts. He just seems unbeatable by a human being. As he watches, we even see this panel where Griffith bites down his teeth so hard, his mouth starts to bleed. Griffith is still a fighter at heart. His heart is still in the same place it used to be when he was the great band leader, but he simply cannot do anything in his current form. Finally, after using absolutely everything he physically and mentally has, Guts eventually just somehow manages to take Wild down. After all this, when Casca and Judo finish attending Guts and Griffith's injuries, for the first time since Griffith's rescue, Casca tells her former leader, "Welcome home." There is so much irony to this. We clearly know what Casca means when she says home. For Griffith, the Band of the Hawk was his home. The band included the people who admired and worked under him. It was his place he belonged to. However, as mentioned earlier, before the mental and physical torturing he had endured in the past year, Griffith is barely a shell of his former self, and things don't look like they can return to normal. Even though Casca gives this gesture, it just doesn't feel like there is a place he could comfortably return to like he used to. We see the main pair in the carriage again, and this time, Guts tells Griffith that it's just like the time with Nosferatu Zod, that both of them are busted up, but that both of them ended up surviving. It goes without saying that in reality, the Wild fight was nothing like the Zod fight. When they encountered Zod, the only reason they both survived was due to Griffith's selflessness and his quick-witted thinking. Even then, they only just narrowly got out with their lives, without inflicting any major damage on Zod. Whereas with the Wild fight, not only did Guts make it out alive again, but he somehow managed to slay him. It was all from Guts' efforts and his efforts alone. So out of all people, Guts knows this the most, but it's almost as if he is trying to show empathy to Griffith by trying to somehow credit him for what he had done. This fight is important in the way it made Griffith aware of the widening gap between the two. Guts had grown more powerful in the past year that he was away, far more than anyone expected, while in contrast, Griffith had weakened so much to the point he couldn't even stand up. If you were to look at the Wild fight in isolation, you would never think that at one point Guts and Griffith were on similar grounds, with Griffith being just a little bit better. And we eventually get what I believe to be one of the most melancholy scenes in all of Berserk. Griffith indicates that he wants to put on the armor, so Guts helps him put it on. He says, "Yeah, that sounds like you. You ain't changed at all this past year." Guts finishes putting it on and says that the White Hawk flies again. Griffith tries to pull the sword out, but he loses his grip. Guts notices this, but he tries to put it on the fact that it's been a year since he's worn any armor, but that he'll get back to normal soon. It's like the two of them both already know how ridiculous and outreaching this notion is, but they just try to ignore it. This unexplainable feeling of false hope is extremely prevalent in the scene. However, this lingering feeling gets completely shattered by the following event. Wild somehow rises up again and snatches Griffith away, and he proceeds to give the band a reality check. He says that their precious toy was broken a long time ago. The old band leader is now completely mangled. He was tortured in the Tower of Rebirth for a year, missing all his muscles and even his tongue. He's not fit to do anything anymore. He can't ever go into battles, wield a sword, stand up, let alone lead the band again. There isn't a slither of hope for the band anymore. After causing this commotion, Wild notices that Griffith doesn't have the Crimson Behelit and starts to panic. This is when Nosferatu Zod appears. He finishes this annoying apostle off without any hesitation and tells Griffith that the Behelit is bound to return to him, before flying off. When Guts questions him what the Eclipse is, Zod replies that he will understand soon. Although Wild is finally completely dealt with, he still managed to damage the most important thing towards the band, their morale. For the past year, their whole plan was to rebound from the low point by rescuing Griffith and putting him back to his original position. However, now that they are conscious of the fact that there is no possibility of him recovering anymore, they lose all their hope. No one needs to say it. The setting speaks for itself. Just as the page reads, everyone knew how that ended, but a man could bring himself to say it. Only the wind announced the end of the fight. Wild's speech acts as the final nail on the coffin for Griffith and the band's dreams. Without Griffith's orders, the Band of the Hawk are not the formidable army they used to be. They are just reduced to what they are as individuals. It is noteworthy that when one of the members alludes to the possibility that Casca can lead the band, Judo quickly dismisses it. He says that Griffith made the Band of the Hawk. Everyone should realize that. If you're still here, all the more. It is significant that out of all people, Judo is the one who says this. If you remember the conversation between him and Guts after his first mission, he was the one who told Guts that on their own, the band are just a bundle of lost mercenary soldiers. Even years later, he is still consistent with his beliefs. It's almost as if the whole band is in the same place Guts was at on the night he killed Gambino. They don't have a clear place to go without any purpose, and perhaps this is why Guts seems nowhere near as visibly distraught as the others, because he has already been in this sort of situation before. Casca says that she wants to be left alone to think. When Guts questions her, she asks back why he was intending to tell the others. He says, to finish the battles you start. However, this is not something which can be easily said, considering Griffith's current state. She says that everybody is weak, so they use other people's dreams to live. However, what she actually wanted for herself was for someone to be near her. It's again shown that what Casca wanted all along was more in line with Guts' original beliefs. She was longing for someone's warmth, and she may have found it through Guts. While Casca attends Griffith, Guts has a conversation with Judo about what he is planning to do moving forward. Judo says that he is going to start a thieves group to be able to look after Griffith. When Guts says that he will join them, he gets told back he has already separated himself from the band, that there is no obligation for him to do that. But this time, he should take Casca with him. Straight after this, Gaston and the rest of Guts' men ask him if they can come with him this time. I will use this opportunity to talk about Gaston's surprising role in the story. All of this time, even though Gaston is certainly a minor character, he represents an important message which contradicts the aforementioned ideologies. As explained in the chapter The Bonfire of Dreams, Gaston had the dream of starting his own clothing store, so he joined the band in order to get the funds necessary to make it happen. But in this scene, when Guts asks Gaston about what he is going to do about his clothing shop, Gaston says that there is no way he can go back to win him, considering the whole band are wanted by the army, and that he values his men more than his dream anyways. So Gaston is an example of someone who abandoned his dream so that he could stay close to the people he saw as his family. This action by Gaston completely contradicts the notion which Griffith pushed in his speech. He gave up his dream for his community, whereas Griffith, as we will see, does the exact opposite. He rejects and negates Griffith's philosophy at almost every point. Gaston's words resonates with Guts and leads him to reflect upon his current self again, just as Griffith's speech did. He says, "The place I belong. Maybe it did exist. I was too stupid and stubborn to notice it. But what I really wished for back then was here. Back then. Why do I always see these things after they're done and gone?" I am sure this last message is something we can all relate to. When he goes to check up on Casca, she breaks down. She says she can't leave off with Guts. Griffith is so small, so fragile. Even though she found some connection with Guts, she cannot ignore her lingering feelings for Griffith. She simply cares about him too much. Guts replies that he can stay, but he gets cut off. Even though Casca was originally so sour regarding Guts leaving the band, she now tells him to go. He shouldn't hang from anyone's dream. he should fight his own battles. Casca brings up Griffith's speech about dreams, the words which influenced Guts to leave the band in the first place, and says that if he wants to be Griffith's friend and equal, he has to go, even if it's alone. This particular scene is often interpreted as being inspirational and motivating, but in reality, it's a scene which shows off Guts' detachment from the band. He already left the band once, and it seems that the rest of the band cannot regard him in the same way that they used to. This is exactly why the narration on the next page reaffirms the earlier message regarding appreciating past things. It says, "Why do I always see these things after they're done and gone?" He had something he valued beforehand, but he abandoned it, and now the very people he valued do not view him in the same way that they previously did. The preceding chapters continue to showcase the internal struggle Griffith has regarding the dilemma to continue pursuing his dream or to value the people closest to him. Griffith hears the conversation between Guts and Casca. This is when he finally realizes that it was his own words and his own beliefs which led Guts to originally leave the band. He sees a hallucination of his former self. He asks, "What do you fear in this place?" and follows to stab the sword into the ground and points towards the kingdom. Again, even considering everything that happened, the kingdom is still awe-inspiring from Griffith's perspective. He stands up using the sword to support himself, and the child version of himself leads him into the cobblestone paths he used to walk and play around in. In real life, while Griffith is hallucinating, he somehow takes control of the carriage and gets it going. Still being under his delusion, he says, "Yes, I rested a bit too long. I've got to go now. This playtime still hasn't ended." That back alley cobblestone path still goes on. Even after being so physically and mentally damaged, his dream still shines bright to him. However, this is all still just a hallucination. The carriage bumps into a rock and Griffith flies off. We then get this very overlooked scene of an alternate future for Griffith and Casca. It's an alternate scenario where Griffith gave up on his dream, only to be looked after by Casca. In this flash forward, set in an unspecified date, these two are married, and they have one son, whom they named Guts. Casca suspects him of daydreaming about the past again. She continues to talk about what the old friends are doing, and she suspects whether a certain someone is still swinging his sword somewhere. All the things they did seems like a distant dream, and that it'd make a good fairy tale for their son. She even goes as far as to say that she prefers this quiet lifestyle, just being close as a family. Griffith lastly narrates, "That's true, this peace and quiet isn't so bad." Whereas just before he was so pumped up by his old dream, he is now saying that this life, where he completely gives up on his dream, might still be nice. He snaps out of this dream and notices that his right arm has broken and starts laughing maniacally. He then sees the sharp end of a tree and rests the side of his neck upon it to try and end his life. However, he cannot do it. He's too weak, both physically and mentally. He is so mentally unstable, he is starting to see hallucinations. He doesn't even know what to believe anymore. This all hits the former band leader at once, as he starts to break down. This is when he notices the behelit in the water, and we get the most shocking and infamous event in the whole story, the Eclipse. The God Hand members appear and they tell Griffith that he holds the Crimson Behelit, the egg of the king, and that everybody else are just invaluable sacrifices. As Void notoriously says, all lies within the currents of causality. Everything has been determined. This is all meant to happen. Griffith gets placed into the palm of the God Hand, and one of the members tells him that he needs to see into his past for an introspective view of his true self. It's set in Griffith's childhood again, in the neighbourhood he used to play around in. The streets are empty, and an old lady tells him to go past this alley, where his friends are waiting. He turns into the alleyway, which gradually becomes pitch black. As he wanders around, he notices he is standing on a pile of rotten corpses. Just as anybody would, this completely terrifies him. However, the old lady appears again and tells him that this is the only way to get to the castle, that you have to step over the fallen ones, otherwise you will end up as one of them. Griffith then recognizes the young boy who died under his command. The boy has the same character and personality, just as Griffith remembered. The boy says he wants to become a knight, and that he wants to serve under him. However, Griffith tells him that he cannot take him with him, because he's already dead. This is when the other corpses begin to stand up, and they question Griffith's answer. Why not? Take us with you. They say that they want to fight beside him, and that they are counting on his dream. He shouts again, and says that he can't take them with him, because they're all already dead. He says, I can't take you with me, I just can't. The old lady reappears, and says that it's him who led all of these people to die. That he only got this far because of these people who put their lives on the line. Despite all the countless number of corpses, the pile still isn't anywhere near big enough to get to the castle. If he stops now, he is just going to end up as one of these corpses. This is when he notices his arms and legs starting to rot. The lady shouts out that if he is afraid and is going to regret his action, he shouldn't have come here in the first place. He asks himself, why did he even do all this? Why couldn't he have just been satisfied, just gazing at the castle? Griffith says he doesn't know why, but the lady shouts back that for him to have come this far, he should have known this was going to happen. If it isn't already clear enough, this hallucination is all a visual metaphor for everything Griffith had been doing to achieve his dream. This is when he finally comes to the realization that he knew all of this. He knew if he wanted to achieve his dream, innumerable people were going to have to die for it. He finally says, I did know. I knew, and I walked. I walked on everyone's corpses to get here. He sees a hallucination of Guts. It's a flashback of the night he assassinated the raiders, when Guts told him that he had always done selfish things to get closer to his dream, and that he knows it's all a part of it. It's extremely important and revealing that out of everyone, Guts is the person who remotivates Griffith. It shows some irony that the exact person who made Griffith temporarily lose focus upon his dream, the person who led him into this downfall, is the very same person who remotivates him to go back and carry out his dream. This leads Griffith to stand back up, as he says, what good is regretting it now? What can I say to the dead now? What good is resenting my sins now? I can't so as much as apologize. This is the path I travelled, to get what I wanted. I can't apologize. No, I won't apologize. If I apologize, if I repent, everything will come to an end. I'll never get to reach that place. He snaps out of it, and Void tells him that it wasn't an illusion, that it was a real vision of his consciousness. Void ultimately says that even now, the castle is still more dazzling than anything. Due to Griffith's dream, tens of thousands of lives have been lost. It's something Griffith knew all along. He knew that fixating on such a big dream, there were bound to be big consequences. However, one person disrupted all of this. At a very crucial time, Guts manages to reach the palm of the God Hand. The two's eyes meet, and Griffith says, among thousands of comrades and tens of thousands of enemies, you're the only one. You're the only one who made me forget my dream. And this is when the most gruesome part of the entire story takes place. Griffith doesn't struggle to accept the sacrifice because at this point, he sees it as doing something he had always done. As it was just shown, countless people had already died due to his dream, and there were only a handful of times when he actually reflected on what he was doing. It was only Guts who disrupted all of this. He was the one who made him forget his dream, and also made him remember it again. This massacre is ultimately an extremification of what he had always previously done. To get closer to the castle, to get closer to his dream, he is going to need to pile up more bodies, and it's just the way that it is. It's not even something worth apologizing for. Even Guts himself realizes this. As Griffith slowly changes into Femto, Guts tries to stop it and tells himself that Griffith would never do such a thing. But he thinks back to the previous things Griffith had told him regarding his dream, and he finally works out that what led Griffith to make this decision comes from something Griffith always had. As Guts lastly says, "Is this what you wanted?" Guts does everything he can to fend off all of the apostles, but before he realizes it, all of his friends, all of the people he had built a connection with, are killed. But there is just one person left, Casca. In a fit of rage, he attempts to get closer to her. He continues to hold his own, but there are simply too many of them. The new Femto appears, and does the worst thing possible to her, right in front of Guts' eyes. Everything is at its worst. However, Skull Knight appears and saves the two of them. Interestingly enough, the Godhead members talk about how that indeed may have been fated to happen, but that either way, the leaping of one fish would never disturb the flow of the river. The time has begun to flow, or the fifth angel has been born, and as they call it, the Age of Darkness has begun. Before Guts wakes up, we briefly see the content of his dream. The band members are all moving towards this void, leaving Guts behind. It's a representation of the Eclipse. Everyone is heading somewhere, and Guts is supposed to be with them, but he misses out. When he regains consciousness, he immediately looks for Casca, but she isn't the same person she used to be. She's lost her memory. She doesn't even know him anymore. Everything the two did and shared together are all long gone. All of this hits Guts at once. At first, Guts cannot handle it, and he falls into a fit of rage. All the people he had with him, all his friends, all his comrades, are taken away. The one person who caused all of this is Griffith. It's the only person he can think about. It's all he can think about. Skull Knight appears again and tells him that due to the brand of sacrifice, he will be having to deal with the dead spirits going after him every single night. Despite all of this, Guts gets awakened again. He says screw sacrifices, offerings, and destinies, that this is war, and it's about the last one standing. He declares that the war has begun, and that he will kill every single one of these monsters. During this last portion of the Golden Age arc, it's not just Griffith who goes through some sort of a rebirth. During the month after the Eclipse, Guts goes through a transformation as well. During this time, he reflects upon everything that happened, and this leads him to make his decision to set off on a new journey. For the main character, the Precious Things dilemma still has not been resolved. After originally joining the band, Guts was eventually influenced by Griffith to seek out some larger purpose to fight for. This ultimately led him to leave the band and to abandon Griffith and the others. However, he came back from this journey only to realize that due to his own selfish desires, he had overlooked and taken for granted the warmth his friends and comrades had given him. However, the biggest irony out of all of this is that in this final part of the Golden Age arc, Guts reverts back and encapsulates everything about Griffith's ideology, which led all of this to happen. Guts is now fixated on a single goal, of getting revenge upon Griffith. This makes him abandon everything and everyone else he still has in his life, like Casca, so that he could fulfill this new desire in his life. Again, to repeat myself, Guts essentially does the same thing Griffith did to him, and the rest of the fallen band members. They both leave behind the ones closest to them to go after some desire. So Guts sets off on this new journey, again carrying something Griffith originally gave him. The overall narrative of Berserk seems to endorse that going after some grand dream or desire does in fact leave one monstrous and soulless. This was shown most obviously through Griffith's actions in the Eclipse, and it is later shown more through Guts himself, as he becomes more and more haunted by the desire to kill Griffith. So instead, through these different characters like Godo, the King, and Gaston, it is shown that it is much more meaningful to value the ones closest to you than to seek out some larger purpose. This is also something which Guts ultimately comes to realize later on in the story, but that is a topic for another day.